Hi, everybody. Welcome to Topic 2 of Unit 3, Sports to Oppress and Sports to Resist. We're still in that Unit 3 theme of when it matters most, but in this case, we're not looking so much at what it's like when a country or citizens of a country have their teams competing against each other and how they're trying to use that to show their own greatness. You're still trying to show your own greatness, but in this case, the regimes are focused inwards on themselves and how their athletes perform and how their athletes act and whether they should be expected to maintain a certain level of performance and what it means if they don't. It's also then a way for athletes in those countries to understand that they can resist through certain kinds of performances or certain kinds of actions that can take them out of the realm of control of those states. So for part of this, I think to start, we have to talk about what we normally mean when we say an athlete represents their country. This typically is a metaphorical conversation. So here's a picture of the Paralympic athletes, Olympians from the United States, from a variety of sports. They absolutely represent us, but they are not formal representatives of the government. They're not diplomats who work for the State Department. They're not soldiers in a military. They're not even bureaucrats working for the state. They are individual citizens, private citizens, who happen to represent our national team. So if you remember how that relationship between NGOs and sporting federations in relation to states goes, this makes some sense to you. But we say they represent us, and they often say they represent us. And one of the things you might see periodically when you see athletes win, particularly in soccer, is the badge covers the heart. And so what does it mean to you? They often touch the badge, touch the heart, kiss the badge over the heart because they're cognizant of what that means in terms of representing the badge and the country and the team. But it's metaphorical, usually. But what happens if you represent one of those states that is not a democratic institution? Freedom House, which is another kind of NGO that ranks political freedom, they have a democracy index that ranks how free states are, and in a given year, there's typically between 35 and 50 roughly countries that are not democracies that are run by dictators. Dictators have different approaches and they view the state differently often than democracies do. The reason there's between 35 and 50 is there's some backsliding where a state might become a democracy and backslide, or you can have democracy backsliding itself and rise of authoritarianism. But the question then is what if you're in one of these countries? What if you represent this guy? So a few years ago, this would have been a picture that needed no captioning or no explanation. This is Saddam Hussein, who was the leader of Iraq from the early 1980s through the early 2000s when he was toppled by an invasion from the United States. He's part of a tradition where the leader expects extensions of the state or represent him. So you may be familiar with an old saying from France, that was the state. I am the state, like l'état c'est moi, and that's my history of speaking Portuguese and Spanish, trying to speak a little bit of French. But the idea is that the leader is an embodiment of the state, which means if you represent the leader in any way, you can commit treason. Actually, if you let them down, if you go against their wishes, if you seem to perform or any duties or any services poorly, you can be doing it against the state. So in a place like Iraq, where Saddam Hussein made his son Uday Hussein the person in charge of both the Iraqi Olympic team and the Iraqi Soccer Federation, and who saw your performance as a reflection of your fealty and loyalty, not to a general idea of the country of Iraq, but actually as the state as embodied by his father, then if you didn't do well, then you were committing treason. In a sense. And so when he's in charge for about 20 years, torture is very common, jailings and beatings are very common. So it was a situation where Iraq was actually a fairly successful soccer team. It had been to World Cups, it had won Asian Cups, Arab Cups, Gulf Cups, and all those different kinds of competitions we talked about last time. But it's certainly a place where you had expected success. He expected success. And when he is both violent towards the players, violent towards the athletes, the coaches, the trainers, and the team stops performing well, they're scared for their lives, they're scared for their families, things don't go well. I got a couple of articles about what this is like. So this is not an abstract concept anymore. And it's not the only place. So in current times, we can look at another place. So here we are, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, also known as North Korea, where Kim Jong-un is the leader. There's an expectation for performance by their athletes, and this is an old tradition in North Korea. So North Korea comes out of the Korean War in the early 1950s, and it's pretty much a hermit kingdom where they don't engage much with the outside world. In fact, we don't really know exactly how the domestic leagues in North Korea function, but we do know they put together some successful national teams, qualified for the World Cup in 1966, an interesting story you'll hear later this unit, qualified again in 2010, and were expected to do well, not by anyone on the outside, but by people on the inside. And when they don't do well, the team, the coaches, the trainers are called to appear before government officials, before students, before other groups in a theater, defend themselves, defend their performance, and ask to denounce the coach and say what he had done wrong and why he had done it wrong. He's no longer allowed to be a coach. He goes off to work in some sort of a labor job. Not a lot's known about what happens to the players, and we don't think anyone's killed, but they have definitely let down the ruler. So there's other examples as well. There's an assignment later this unit that I'll ask you to complete that will called Sporting Linkages, where you look at several examples and try and place them into which one of these units or topics they fit in. And so you'll see some others that are sports to oppress and sports to resist. Now, not all of the oppression comes in such heinous ways. Okay, there's other means of oppression. So here's a picture of one of the defining athletes of my youth. Her name is Martina Navratilova, who is from Czechoslovakia and who defected, we'll talk about defections here in a minute, to the United States. She's the most, the best Wimbledon tennis champion ever. I know in the modern we think of Serena Williams as the greatest of all time for her overall performance. In Wimbledon specifically, Navratilova has 9 singles and 20 overall championships, including doubles and mixed doubles. Serena has 7 or 13. Still amazing stuff, but she was really all that. And as she was a youth player for Czechoslovakia, which was part of the Soviet bloc, there was an expectation not just for her to be a dominant athlete, but for her to be a relatively shy or sheltered or circumspect athlete, not to be gregarious, not to make friends, not to act like different from a lot of the people in her country. There was a perception that certain kinds of behavior were not becoming of someone from a Soviet bloc state, to understand her privileges and to not be seen to be enjoying herself much. She didn't like this. She didn't like the oppression. She didn't like having minders follow her everywhere. And she took advantage of this and defected to the United States. So when she starts to win Wimbledon championships, it's not for Czechoslovakia. It's for the United States. And it was always a little strange for me to understand that relationship growing up. But defections were not uncommon, and we came to understand them. And it's an interesting way to see how sports can be then leveraged. This is her with the Duchess of Kent, who was a British royal. After she wins her first title in 1978, one of the problems with defecting is you're prevented by the home country, Czechoslovakia in this case, from seeing or engaging with your family. And the British government began to pressure Czechoslovakia to allow her family to reunite with her in England for the Wimbledon championships the next years. So you start getting that interesting high-level connections. But it was her way to resist. So they're trying to oppress her. She's trying to resist. And what you end up with is interesting ways. So defections is one of these, as I just mentioned. They are not unheard of anymore. It's not as common as it once was. These were things that we read in the sports pages, maybe not every week, or even every month, but certainly several times each year. And the higher profile an athlete, the more remarkable it was, seen as a victory for our side. Now, the other side, for example, this is Alexander Mogilny, who was from the USSR. When he defects, He actually doesn't become a U.S. citizen in part because the USSR collapses very shortly thereafter, and he's happy to be a Russian citizen. But he defects because he wants to play in the National Hockey League, and both in the NHL, a little bit in the NBA, but certainly in Major League Baseball with Cuba, defectors from Cuba. There's an ability on the part of the regime to say, you know, those people are going for money grabs. Like they don't have an ideology. In fact, they're weak. We don't believe that they had a strong commitment, a strong constitution. They're greedy, unlike the rest of us. And so when he defects, it's to play in the league. Amazing hockey player, great forward, plays in the United States for 20 years, lives and works in Russia now as a retiree. Nadia Comaneci was a phenomenal gymnast, and one that we in the United States were quite taken with. So one of the things you'll find later in this, when I talk about the Cold War, is it was sometimes uncomfortable or unwelcome for us to express any sort of adoration or respect for communist countries. Sports was an exception because you could express what I would call safe adoration. You could say, I really like that athlete, or I really like their performance in the sporting realm, and get away with it. But she was undergoing that same kind of pressure that Navratilova had, and she eventually defects to the United States. It's considered a huge victory for us in the context of the Cold War, choosing our ideology over theirs. So they're trying to control their athletes, trying to control their minders. So one of the things to keep in mind is that an athlete or a team of athletes, they travel, right, with trainers, with coaches, with people who are in charge of logistics. You can embed secret police with them, like the Stasi was the East German police. They traveled with Katarina Witt, who won the 1984 ice skating championship, 88. She was really someone that we looked up to, but there were minders. There were people going there, and they're conscious and aware of that. Not all of it has to come through defections, and not all of it's against dictatorial regimes. So we have this famous moment in 1968. We've referred to it before with the fist raised on the medal stand, the Black Power salute that Tommy Smith and John Carlos I would say carried out or did, but they demonstrated the Black Power salute on the stand. That's to resist what they consider a racist regime. They're looking for racial justice and changes in the United States, right? So you have those opportunities, and you can wear armbands, and you can have things on a shirt underneath, an undershirt. Like there's ways in which to make protests. But those other times when you're in the pool, this is that blood in the water moment from the Melbourne Olympics in 1956, water polo. So these kinds of things are available and abound. And if we want to get more recent, the idea that Colin Kaepernick and others like him, Megan Rapinoe, for example, in soccer, could kneel during the national anthem to stage a minor protest. That's that ability to resist something and to do it in the public eye. Now, that kind of thing works better when you take advantage of the sports space in a given society so that the message resounds. John Carlos and Tommy Smith did it during the Summer Olympics. That is different than in a traditional track meet, where fewer people are paying attention. It wouldn't have had the same sort of resonance, but because events are in our sports space, it resonates. It's not just that there's attention, but it's the sports space that they're trying to get people to react. Colin Kaepernick, as an NFL athlete, that movement spread to a lot of athletes, but also a lot of other sports. All the way through to the English Premier League, where they're taking a knee, having a moment of silence to protest racism and or people who are being killed by the police. So there's different kinds of meanings behind those actions. It's that idea of resisting the state that comes through. So I know we've covered a lot of varying examples here. You could go to different kinds of regimes. So when there was a Yugoslavia, when there was a USSR, like we looked at in that last unit, and teams traveled from one, say, Soviet republic or one Yugoslav republic to the other, particularly if they came from the center to the periphery, you could use the chants to hang banners in your stadium, to chant, to have flags, then to win, that were your opportunity to resist. This is a great example of how sports matters most and what it means to utilize sports to both the good and the bad, the oppression and the resistance.